Hi, welcome to the Sifu Mimi Chan show. Thanks for joining the conversation. Hi everyone. Today I thought I would do something a little bit different, which is another solo podcast, but instead of me sitting in my Zoom desk or, just with my normal bookshelf behind me, which maybe one day I'll talk about, I thought I would actually show you where Oscar and I spend a lot of time, which is our gym. One day I'll give you a little bit of a tour, but this is what's more comfy for me. So instead of sitting at my desk, I thought it'd be different and provide our YouTube viewers with something different to look at other than just me sitting at a desk with a microphone. So I do have my lav mic on today, though. Hopefully sound is coming over good for us, for those of you who are listening on the audio podcast. But today's discussion will be a little bit on lineage. I have been promising for a really long time to my Kung Fu listeners out there, my martial arts practitioners, those of you who follow and subscribe because you're really interested in my expertise in martial arts and a little bit more about Walam and what we do, I thought I would take some time to discuss lineage. For those of you who follow me on Patreon, you guys got a really special kind of backstory on some of the events that happened this week in regards to one of my father's older Kung Fu brothers passing away. And I talked a lot about that, and it really sparked a lot of thoughts for me regarding lineage and martial arts and the importance of that and how that also can get very complicated. I recently did a talk last month in AAPI Heritage Month for a company. I do keynote speaking. So quick plug for anybody out there who wants keynote speakers. I do a variance of different topics, but I kind of wanted it to be an interactive conversation, which is also why for my patrons on live, I'm going to be doing more segments where I have live streams and you can interact and ask questions and things like that. So I think that sometimes these podcasts are great because I have the most wonderful guests on the show. I have just people beyond experts in their field, but that have such interesting points of view and provide so much value to the conversation. And I really am spoiled because I get to just sit back and listen. And oftentimes I'd be very honored that guests say, oh, I'd like to interview you. I want to hear your thoughts. And I know that some of you out there have expressed the same, that you'd like to hear some of the things that I'm an expert in. And I know often I have my favorite co-host and human of all time, Oscar, on the show with me. But today I am writing solo. So at that keynote conversation, at that keynote presentation, one of the questions I kind of wanted the audience to get warmed up with was, what comes to mind when you hear the word Kung Fu Master? And as you can imagine, the responses range from Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan to old Kung Fu guy from like Shaw Brothers. And that made me really laugh because that was pretty much, honestly, growing up, kind of what I had in my mind watching all of those movies. And a lot of you will see this guy right here and think Kung Fu Master because 1000% he is Kung Fu Master. So I am fortunate that I did grow up with a Kung Fu Master in my life. And because of that, it has shaped who I am and my perception of things. And so this book also, I know this is going to sound totally like I'm advertising throughout this whole conversation, and that totally was not the intent. But the book I'm holding for those of you who are not watching me on video but listening on audio is my father's book on his lectures, from the early 70s regarding Kung Fu styles, theory, philosophy, weapons, Chinese medicine, and it's just a lot of the philosophy that we hope our Walam practitioners will learn, absorb, and then take with them into their life, right? So this book is really great. Now, as a disclaimer, it was taken from lectures from the 70s. So as you know, there's verbiage, there's ways that things were explained. It's also translated. So it's not like, oh, this is a great, beginning, middle, end type of story. What it is amazing philosophy and information that then allows us as practitioners and as humans to really take that philosophy and apply it in our life, right? And so I also did an audiobook of this not too long ago, thanks to one of our Walla members, Sifu Georgia student Eric. Shout out to him for pushing me to actually do the audiobook on it, because he loved the book so much. And then I thought, you know what, why not? Let me read the audiobook and also digitize it so it's available on Amazon. So not just Wallum practitioners have access to it, but like everybody can have access, because really you don't have to be a martial artist to hear a lot of this philosophy. A lot of it applies to just, Chinese culture and understanding Chinese American culture now, because as we are here in America applying all of this, it changes, right? Like how things were conducted in ancient China times with martial arts and how we see it moving and progressing into now definitely evolves. So as I read that book in the recording, it really was quite a learning experience, because one, I've never recorded an audiobook before, and it was very overwhelming and exhaustive and tiring. But I also got a chance to literally relearn the book, reread the book. And even now, today, after having done that, after having read this book so many times, every time I pick up the book, I go, oh, okay, this makes a lot of sense. I need to apply this. I need to study this. I need to learn this better. I need to be reminded of this. There's some really key lines in here, and they're bolded, but like really if you're into learning and rereading and going deeper into things versus just like, oh, check, I learned that, I read that once, I've got it. This is one of those books that you reread. And for those of you that are loyal listeners, thank you very much. You'll know that the amazing Coach Dan John and I have been dissecting The Sword in the Stone for a really long time. I think we're on episode like 12 or something like that. And we're only in like chapter 7 or 8. And sometimes we only get through 1 or 2 pages during our discussions. And he really taught me about the value of the reread. And there was a time in my life where I really enjoyed like the Chronicles of Narnia, and how I had read somewhere in my 20s that, oh, this is one of those books that you read when you're young and when you're an adult and then when you're older. And, for a lot of people that might still hold up. The books don't hold up as well, and once it's been kind of dissected, there are some problematic things. But in my opinion, just my opinion, C.S. Lewis is still by far an amazing author, writer. I could never compare. But The Sword in the Stone, T.H. White, like, wow, that is something that you can really go deep in. And just to give you an example, when Dan John and I were talking on the last podcast, it literally aligned with that whole Oscar sham of Will Smith and Chris Rock. Like, it literally applied to that situation. And you're thinking, how can a book that was written so long ago have so much relevance? And that is the same for this, right? This is lectures from the 70s, and it just kind of is this awesome reminder that we can always be learning from history. Many of you out there are saying, here we go, AAPI history education. As you know, I've spent the last year plus of my life now advocating for that, because I felt such a deficit in what I knew. So obviously, I've talked a lot about the importance of the reread and why I picked this up, and I promise you I am going to get to lineage. So as you know, I like to overanalyze things, and one of the things that has been brought to my attention is the fact that throughout martial history, there's always this sense of pride of where you come from, who you are, who are your roots, where are you connected to, especially in Chinese martial arts here in America. Because here in America, anybody can just open a school and say that they are a master, and people don't know otherwise. So in the early days, I remember a lot of people would ask my father, hey, how do you how do you know if someone is legitimate? How do you know if they trained with the people they say they trained with? Like, is there a Rolodex? Yeah, there was Rolodex back then. Is there a listing somewhere? This is pre-internet, obviously. He would, of course, say that he would know from their bow. He would know right away from their Kung Fu bow if they know what they're doing from their first movement. But those of us who aren't Kung Fu masters, experts that know everything about martial arts and can tell, one way that we usually tell people is if you're looking for traditional martial arts, traditional Chinese Kung Fu, that's something different than I'm looking for learning from someone who can teach me a lot about physicality. They're two different things. So if you're looking for something that encompasses the philosophy, that mind-body connection, the cultural aspects, and learning about the cultural aspects of that style, that lineage, what country it comes from, and just kind of going down and following that lineage, then usually you ask, who was your Sifu? Who did you learn from? Because if you are a self-proclaimed master here in the United States, that's great, good for you, but that's not necessarily like meaning that you're coming from a traditional line, right? And so it doesn't mean that they're bad. I'm sure there are people that have a lot of knowledge about things and have decided to do their own thing. Sidebar, if they do any Walum and they're not on our website, then that's really disrespectful and that is frowned upon from the Walum system. But lineage is one way in which I often tell people is a great way to see, like, where do you come from? And when people aren't able to tell me who their Sifu was or who their Sifu was, then I know kind of what they've been taught, right? And so for our students, we make sure that they learn this. We light incense every day before a class to our ancestors, and it is important for them to know who are these people that we put on our martial arts altar. It's not religious, it's martial arts. Who are these people that we pay respects to every single day before we start our class? We want them to have that connectivity and know they're part of something greater in terms of the history of it, right? And the richness of it. And that's something that's important to us. Again, doesn't mean it's important to everyone, but it is really important to us. And having that lineage really kind of helps humble you and remind you that you are a part of something, kind of a part of something small. And thinking about watching Cosmos and realizing when you're a part of this like cosmic calendar and you're like literally like a blade of grass or something in the universe of time, it was honestly a little bit anxiety inducing for me. But at the same time, in martial arts, it kind of does the same thing where you're this person training in 2022 is the year it is now, but this goes back so far, so many generations. Our students have to learn who, of course, Grandmaster Chen is my father. They learn about him. They learn about his teacher. They learn about where he came from, what temple he studied from, and then who was the founder of the praying mantis system that he learned from, Master Wang Long, and where's that lineage take us to? Like, we keep going back. It's like being an archaeologist? Yeah, like being an archaeologist and kind of trying to dig and find out more and more and more about our past. And there's gaps. There's gaps in that past because not all history is preserved well. And that's why I think it's on us to help kind of continue to teach that so the history isn't lost, but also so that we can learn from it, right? And so I was talking earlier about my uncle, or my Siba, which is my father's older Kung Fu brother, and that he recently passed away, and it brought up all of these feelings and thoughts, but what it also brought up was memories. And I think all of us go through this when we suffer loss and we lose someone. But for us at the school, my encouragement for my students was to use this as an opportunity for gratitude and to use this as an opportunity to feel that connectivity to our lineage, right? And so one of the things that, and I use my students, I tell them, hey, we should be doing this. And it's really because that's what I feel that I should be doing. It's something that kind of helps hold me accountable to taking a moment from getting on the computer and doing all the things I'm always doing, from, working on all of these different projects and activism and being pulled in different directions. It's like, take a moment and just kind of have that gratitude and remember. And one of the things that jumped out at me was Oscar, my husband, and we were in Hong Kong. We went to Hong Kong very, very often. We take students there. We did tours. We have a lot of family, extended family there. We of course do the China tours, but we were walking around Hong Kong Times Square. So for our listeners and our viewers, there is a Hong Kong Times Square. It is kind of like the New York Times Square, but in Hong Kong, and it is the same. There's the huge screen. There's billions of people, it feels like, everywhere, all the time. There is unbelievably huge shopping malls and escalators going all over. It's just so crowded. It's like being in the middle of New York Times Square if you've never been to Hong Kong Times Square. But it's very, very busy. And we were just walking. I think we had a free day, and we were just going to go and have lunch and kind of relax. And all of a sudden, in front of us, jumping out and super excited to see us, was my Sibot, which was my father's older Kung Fu brother, Master Chan Leong, and he jumped in front of us. I think he recognized Oscar, who was a little bit of a standout in Hong Kong, and he was so excited to see us. And we ended up going with him to lunch to eat ramen noodles or some sort of noodle soup, and we ended up just spending the whole day with him. And then we went to a video store to buy a bunch of Kung Fu DVDs, and he bought them for us. He bought us all these Kung Fu DVDs and started talking to us about the different moves in the movies, and he loves Kung Fu and martial arts, of course, and it was just such a great day, right? It was such a great day and a great time that we had with him, and it was just such a great opportunity. And it's funny because it has nothing to do with the training, which of course training that I did receive from him was amazing, but it had nothing to do with being in class or a big special event or anything crazy. It was just by accident. It was by accident we ran into him. But now that he's gone, that's one of the first things I remember. I mean, there's a lot of memories, but that jumps out at me, and it makes you go, wow, okay, sometimes what you don't realize is going to be a huge impact on you, and a memory that allows you to have gratitude later for something you wouldn't have really known, right? Like you would never have really thought about it. It really made me feel something, and continues to, and was very impacting for me. So I just wanted to share that. I just wanted to share that it's amazing to belong to a lineage in which you can go to other countries and have people connected to you through your martial arts, and then to have these experiences that maybe don't really have anything to do with Kung Fu or training, but just as relationships, as humans, as connectivity, and then years and years and years later have it be something so important. And so what that kind of makes me do is try to remember that everything I'm doing now and the memories I create now and every action I take could be something really, really important later on, and I just would never have known it. Because even at that time we thought, oh, it's so cool, we ran into Sibot and we were able to kind of have a day with him. Oh great, it wasn't something that we were like, oh my gosh, this is the most amazing thing. But that's one of the things that sticks out, that jumps out in my memories. And I'm really grateful, and I'm hoping you all are hanging in there with me and okay listening to this monologue rather. But Kung Fu lineage and knowing where you come from is something that's really important to me. And being able to take my students to China to see where the burial site, the memorial of my father's master is, and allowing them to honor him and honor the system and honor teachings and honor something from a place and time that they have no connectivity to. Somebody here that grew up in America that has like full toilets, that have a completely different lifestyle than anything that was happening in that era, I think is really, 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 really special. And I feel this sense of pride and sense of togetherness when we get to do that. So we'll take our students to China, and we'll go to the Great Wall, and we'll see the Forbidden City, and we'll see all of these amazing sites and all of the things. It's like, going to Rome and seeing the Colosseum. But honestly, my favorite part is going back to the village, seeing the family regarding martial family, all of the people that have connectivity, going to Lei Quan Chan's memorial, which is our grandmaster, my father's master, and having my students be able to go there and pay homage. That's something that you see in the documentary. Yeah, it's really, really, really special. And I don't think this is limited to martial arts. I'd love for listeners to give me some comments and feedback on this. I don't think it's limited to Kung Fu practitioners. I think people are obsessed with 23andMe and genealogy and family tree because it's so interesting to go back and see where you come from. I am a neophyte in understanding anything about like the knights and their shields and their colors and banners and flags, and I'm failing at this. I'm sure someone out there is screaming right now, this is what it's called, but it's kind of like in medieval times in Europe and all of these things where you go back and you know your family's crest, right? And why, and you might be, you know, related to the King of England or something, right? You come from this long lineage, and I think people are interested in their roots and what there's connectivity to, where they come from. I feel like maybe because I didn't get exposure in school to something like that, like other than your basic family tree, here, who are your grandparents and then who are you, I don't think there's an emphasis on that type of study. Correct me if I'm wrong, listeners and viewers, because I've not really come across that. As you can see, I've had a lot of issue with the way education is for children, especially in this country, and I feel like the things that we should be focusing on or could be focusing on are missed opportunities, and we are just focused on standardized testing and memorization. I feel it would be way more interesting to show a child something where they look at a map and then they see a country that's not in the United States, because let's face it, there's some line there that is connected to somewhere else, and that lineage then makes them realize that, oh, I'm connected to this country, so-and-so next to me is connected to this country, and we're all connected to somewhere, but now we're here, and we're all American. Yeah, I think there's something there. And it's not limited to the Asian culture or having AAPI history, which is what I'm asking for, right? I feel like if everyone knows where they come from, it'll help connect them to now. That's at least what it does for me. One of the things with Kung Fu lineage that has been really interesting always is there's an argument. Everyone wants to be connected to the line of famous quote-unquote masters or people maybe that movies were made out of. And no disrespect to any of those masters, because, you know, but they just happen to have been chosen out of time. And then, you know, they get movies made out of them because or maybe there was literature on them, and so that people knew about them. And so there's always these arguments about who learned from who, or I can draw a direct line to my lineage. And, you know, here in America, you have to be really careful of that too, because like any leadership, you have to kind of fact check and make sure that things are correct. There's so many people that have used my father to fact check and said, hey, so-and-so told me this, is it true? Because they know he's kind of that wealth of information and has been here so long. He's seen people who have come over from Asia, and he knows people, and he knows when people were here, and he knows what they knew when they were here and if they actually learned Kung Fu. And I think he's tired now. I don't think he really wants to entertain those conversations anymore. I don't think he's at a place in his life where he feels the need to entertain those conversations, and I'm glad about that. But at the same time, it's interesting because people can also now use lineage to quote unquote their advantage. And then with anything that is seen as credible or powerful or interesting, then you get the flip side of it, which is people taking advantage of it or using it or exploiting it. And unfortunately, that's a lot of the American way, right? And that's something that we are constantly battling with. You know, my consistent battle with trying to keep tradition alive in a modern world and then making it apply here is a constant battle. So the last thing I'm going to kind of close out with is in relationship to lineage and to martial arts and to teaching is that word, that master word, which is Sifu, which is teacher, which is father figure, which is encompassing so much more than just a coach for a sport. No disrespect to athletes in sports and everything like that, but I'll give you a little bit of history, which again, to plug my documentary, Pui Chan Kung Fu Pioneer, this is in there with some cool visuals rather than me just sitting here stretching and moving around in our gym. So Sifus in the old and ancient tradition times were almost like your adopted parent. If you were taken in by a Sifu, if you went to train and then you were chosen to be a disciple, you were chosen to be a part of that family, of that inner circle. You were considered like a son to the Sifu. And give you some reference, the historical information that I researched when doing the documentary shared that if that student got in trouble with the law, for instance, they were like, okay, we're going to line up your family members and punish them or kill them. The first one, before your parents, that would be punished or killed was your Sifu, because that relationship was the most important relationship that you had. That person was just incredibly important to where that would have been the worst thing that could possibly happen to you. So that relationship with your Sifu it's kind of beyond even a parent. And it means father figure. It means parent, it means your Kung Fu teacher, of course, but it's beyond that. And there's this really great breakdown of the word Si and Fu or Shi Fu and that expert term and who it is and how it's broken down. And it's pretty cool. But I am not going to pretend that I am good at Chinese because, as you know, I was born here and my mom is Jamaican and my dad spoke Cantonese and was not school educated to where he could kind of explain the dynamics of the lineage from, or how words are derived, their derivatives and where they come from. And so the word Sifu itself, as you've noticed, I've been saying father and son, male. Women weren't allowed to learn Kung Fu. So there was really no need to have a female word for Sifu because women didn't really learn Kung Fu. Sifu is a male term. So in the Chinese language, if you refer to your dad, it's a male person, and your mom is a female person, and your aunt is a female person on either your father or your mother's side. It's the words are very specific. So there is gender to it. There is chronological order to it. There is so much involved in one word, which is why the word is so important. So a Kung Fu master is a Sifu, right? Because back in the day, there was only one. Like you wouldn't have multiple Sifus of a style per se. So here in America, that has kind of changed. Like we have a certification system in which we empower others to continue the lineage and proliferate the style. And so we give them this credibility and we give them the title of Sifu so that they can be a master in their school. But there is still just the one Sifu, right? And in our style, that would be Grandmaster Chan. And he would be a Sifu. He still considers himself Sifu, even though he is now like great grandmaster. Yeah, and so he really, really has this like long lineage already, right? But the word Sifu is male. Women weren't allowed to learn. And the reason is women would get married. So when women would get married, they would leave the family. They would go outside of the home. They would go outside of the village. And with it, they would have taken all of the secrets of Kung Fu. They would have taken the family style and shared it with their new family. And that was not acceptable. So women weren't allowed to learn. Modern day now, of course, women obviously are allowed to learn Kung Fu. I'm grateful that my father, while is a very traditional man, he is also very progressive in thinking and knowing that he wanted to come to a place like America so that he would have the freedom to then share his art form and share his culture and share his style, and with not just other Chinese guys, but with all people of diverse backgrounds, and that included women. And so now we have female Sifus, and people in the past, in the 80s and 90s, we were like, okay, what do we call Sifus who are women? Because that's a male word, because the wife of a Sifu is called Simo, and that's it, Sifu and Simo, right? And so there was no husband to a Sifu because there's only a Simo. So a lot of the older guys, my brothers, like to call Oscar Simo Oscar. He loves it. He embraces the term and totally takes that on that persona, and he's fine with it. Of course, now he's a certified Sifu, so he's also a Sifu, but he doesn't mind being called Simo by my brothers who are his elders. I don't know if like younger people calling him that would be okay, but he totally embraces it. So yeah, that word was often thought that we needed to reinvent something that was the equivalent to a female, to a male Sifu. So what would be an equivalent word? And my thought process and what was important to me was actually changing the perception and saying, no, Sifu can mean a female instructor. Sifu can mean a female Kung Fu master, because we are now in 2022 and we are in the United States of America, and we are teaching this next generation differently. We are doing different things. We are opening doors. We are changing perceptions. And so why do we need to invent a new term so that we again are separated into a different category when we are actually the same and we are equal? And so my mission, since I was very young, because I was a very young female Sifu at one time, not now, my goal was to change that perception. And now I believe people don't even know the word Sifu is only meant for males, because I really believe we've gotten to a point where there are more female Sifus. It is widely accepted, and I would like to believe like I had a small part in that, of that perception. When I was in New York in the 90s, I took a student with me to New York for a competition. And we were at this competition, and we were being hosted by a friend of mine who was taking us around Chinatown. He was another instructor who was running the tournament. And we were going to go see my student's uncle in Chinatown. And he was so excited. He goes, my uncle's really excited to meet my Sifu, because as you know, Chinese families, they know that meeting the Sifu is meeting someone very important. So it was very, very exciting. And, we were driving around, we went to Chinatown, and my student said, oh, look, there's my uncle. We got out of the car, my student and I, and then my friend who was driving us around at the time and who was there, he brought us up to the curb so that we could get out of the car. And the uncle immediately ran over to the driver, my friend, who's a man, and said, oh, Sifu, it's so nice to meet you. It's such an honor. And my friend's like, yeah, I'm not the Sifu. She is the Sifu. And he was apologetic, but shocked. He kind of had a double take and, wait, what? At the time, I'm in the 90s, I will admit, I looked a lot younger. And so, yeah, a young female Sifu was his nephew's teacher. And it wasn't what he perceived at all, right? It wasn't what he expected. And I feel like now, though, when I walk up with my students, people know I am their teacher. People accept that, and it's not a shock. And that was just from the 90s to now. So we've come a long way. We still have a long way to go, but at the beginning of this conversation, I started and I told you that I had asked that company that I did a keynote for, like, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word Kung Fu Master? And it's probably still this guy, I'll be honest, because it's still the first word. It's still the first image that I get. But my hope is that now maybe people who look like me can also be included in that description, and that with time that we will continue to change things, and that maybe we're making progress. So I did purposely wear this because I'm Sifu, that's why shirt. Those of you who are not on YouTube watching this and just listening, I am wearing this shirt, and that was totally on purpose. Shout out to Jessica, who is one of my Kung Fu students and niece. She's both. She's trained both with me and her Sifu in Tennessee, and she got me this shirt. She said it reminded me of her of me, and that it would be totally appropriate for me. So in any case, that's my episode for today on lineage, on our martial arts, kind of episode. Hopefully this was interesting to you. Please let me know. I'd love to hear your feedback. And until next time, I'll talk to you then. Bye.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Please subscribe and rate my podcast on your platform of choice and leave a review. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/Sifu Mimi Chan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook.